We've talked about self-assessing. We've talked about understanding your skills. We've talked about gaining knowledge on the different career paths that are out there. This session is about taking the knowledge of those career paths and then filling in the gaps by connecting with people and beginning to establish networks that are going to be supportive of you as you are thinking about your own career next steps. So from knowledge to networking is going to be the main focus for today. What we're going to cover then today are sort of the different approaches that you can take to make sure that as you are thinking about building networks, that you're doing it as effectively as possible and using all the right resources available to you to find the right people, to ask the right types of questions, and then to leverage the information that you're getting from people as part of that process. So we're going to sort of work our way through this list of 6 different steps that you can take. And hopefully this will fill in some of the gaps that you might have about how to build these networks and find the right people moving forward. So the first tool that I'm actually going to focus on is Handshake. You can also use Handshake to find your peers here at Penn, postdocs, other PhD students, and also some recent alumni. So we've had the Handshake for about, 5 or 6 years now. So there are recent alumni in here that you can also find through the system I'm going to show you in just a second here. So to do this, you're going to go to your Handshake login. You're going to log into Handshake. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see the option to find people. So if you click on the Career Center one at the bottom, that's how you schedule appointments with us here at Career Services. Jobs and events make sense. People is the students and postdocs who are in the Handshake system. When you get to the People's tab, you can then focus in on people from the University of Pennsylvania. There's about 500 plus, probably more schools who are part of the Handshake system. So you can look at any students who have public profiles on Handshake if that's what you wanted to do. But you can also just focus on the Penn ones. Again, these are people who've made their profiles public. They're sort of open to people engaging with them. You have some control over whether your profile is public or not. So you can narrow it down by the University of Pennsylvania, and then you can filter on different elements, right? So I filtered here on doctoral students, a graduation year I could filter on a specific major, and that way you can narrow down the thousands of Penn students to the people that you might be interested in learning more about. If I do that, then I have a student profile as part of my role here at Career Services. You might find me. I'm not currently a PhD in genomics and computational science, but that's my alter ego here. The other thing I can filter on then are employers. Employers that these other students or postdocs or alumni have some connection with. Maybe they had an internship at one of these employers. Maybe they came from that employer before starting their program at Penn. But if they've integrated that employer into their profile, then you might be able to find current students and postdocs and recent alums who have some knowledge of an industry or an organization that you might be interested in. And as you can see on the right-hand side, that you can follow them on Handshake, you can message them on Handshake. But once you find someone that you might be interested in, you can also just find their Penn email address in the Penn directory and email them directly, right? And reaching out to someone who's a current Penn student just like you or a postdoc just like you and saying, hey, I'd love to chat about your experience is one of the easiest forms of networking that you can do, one of the least stressful types of networking because you're in the same boat, as it were, right? So it's a very easy to find someone, to connect with them, to Zoom with them, to chat with them, to meet them somewhere. And so that's always a consideration to have, right? The Handshake people database is a great place to start. We talked about MyPenn in the previous sessions, right? The Penn alumni specific database, about 490,000 Penn alumni in this system that you can narrow down by different criteria. Here, I've narrowed it down by graduate students with a PhD. There's one more filter that you can look for on MyPenn that we didn't talk about before, and that's this available for mentorship tag, right? So that you can see this red tag floating above in the profiles above here, right? If one of these people has available for mentorship. Now, this is something that an alum who sets up their profile on MyPenn chooses to select. They say, I am available for mentorship. Now, it doesn't mean that they want to be your mentor, because no one really wants to be a mentor, but it does mean that they are more open to people reaching out to them to say, hey, I'd love to chat with you about your experiences, right? So they're likely to be more responsive because they've tagged available for mentorship, that they are available for people to reach out to them for mentorship style conversations. Now, that's true, obviously, when they set that tag up, but if they did that 4 years ago, they probably forgot they did it at all, right? So if you were reaching out to any of these people, obviously, you could remind them, right? You could say, hey, thank you so much for selecting the available for mentorship tag. It's so nice to have people who are open to having these types of conversations. And if they forgot that they set it up or they didn't remember doing it, then to a certain extent, in a minor sort of guilt trip kind of way, you're going to encourage them to sort of stick with that sort of idea that they did set that up and they are more open to doing that. and they might be more likely to respond to your outreach, right? So you're not making them feel bad about it, you're making them feel good about selecting this, even if they've totally forgotten that they did. So that available for mentorship tag is great because, again, you can find people's email addresses within MyPenn, and then you reach out to them and say, I found you on MyPenn. Thanks so much for being available for mentorship that you selected. I'd love to chat about your background. Now, again, you have to pick the right people for the right reason, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. We talked about the alumni tool on LinkedIn, right? Another way of finding people and potentially having and reaching out to people. So you're going to look for the University of Pennsylvania. You're going to select University of Pennsylvania as the school page. You're going to click on alumni. You can then search through that database of 200,000 plus alumni and current students with any criteria or any filter that you choose. And then you can find, in this case, 474 people that you could do something with, right? These are people that you found that match your criteria. But what I'm going to suggest is that at this point, you stop and don't be tempted to click on connect for everyone, right? Because that's what, when you're networking, like I'm going to connect with someone on LinkedIn. And potentially don't even click on the message on LinkedIn, primarily because sometimes you use LinkedIn messaging, you have to pay for the premium account, which you don't want to do. But also not everyone uses LinkedIn as their primary source of communication. Right? So at this point, it's worth taking a pause and saying, yes, I found people who match the criteria that might help me answer my questions, but what are my questions? What am I trying to do here? What are these people how are they meant to help me? And why would they help me, right? So these are all good things to do before you start connecting. Because if you click on connect, chances are high that someone is just going to ignore you if they don't know who you are. So it's not just about finding people, it's about finding the right people. And so what does that mean in terms of a strategy? Any networking that you're doing is really effective when you think about the goals that you have first, when you think about the questions that you are trying to find answers to, right? Because when you have specific questions in mind, not only does networking become easier, especially for people with more introverted tendencies, because now it's more goal-oriented, you know what you're doing when you're having these conversations, but also it helps you know who to look for, who might be most responsive because they actually have an answer to the question that you have. What you're not trying to do in networking is ask broad questions that you need to do the research on yourself, right? So you're not going to reach out to someone and say, what can I do as a PhD? Or tell me about the world of consulting as a whole, because that's work that you can do. We've talked about how you can begin to explore some of those paths in the previous sessions. You want to ask questions that use the lived experiences of the people that you're reaching out to, because that's why they would enjoy having the conversations with you. That's why they feel valuable. If you can point to something that they've done and ask them about that, not just ask them broadly about what they know about the world of consulting or whatever it might be. Right? So the questions at the bottom of this slide, where they are you questions, are much more effective than sort of the I questions. What can I do or what should I do, right? So when you made the decision to do X, how did you make that decision? When you thought about applying for this role, how did you talk about your skills, right? So whatever the questions that you're asking people, the more that it involves their lived experience, the more they will feel valued. The more they feel valued, the more positive they will find that experience, and the more positively they'll think about you, which is a great way to start a professional relationship with someone. So when you think about your questions, make sure they're questions that draw from the lived experiences of other people. So when you are thinking then about who to connect with, you want to say, well, who can answer this specific question that I have about this industry or this field or this organization, right? That takes 474 people and narrows it down to maybe 3 people who have an answer to that question. Not everyone's going to be in a position to help you, right? They may have just started. They may be at the end of their career, right? They may not have information that is relevant to where you are in the process. They're more likely to respond to you if they have something in common with you, a degree, an institution, a hobby, a background. They're more likely to respond if they have someone in common with you. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But the best person to talk to as part of any networking, obviously, is the person who actually gets back to you, right? A lot of people you might reach out to may not be in a position to help you, and they may be the best person, but they're just not available to you. So anyone who's able to connect with you has some information that you can use and then operationalize as part of your own exploration or even application to different types of roles that are out there. So then what are your questions? And again, this is going to be harder to say, well, these are your questions, because they are going to be unique to the journey that you're on, based on your past experience, your knowledge, what you are studying, the journey that you've been on, and then what you are going to be interested in moving forward, right? These are all parts of the process. Now, these are general questions here, but these are examples of the types of questions that you can ask, right? And again, they are you questions. They really incorporate the lived experiences of other people. So just examples of the types of questions that are out there. And if you're looking for ways to get questions that are relevant to you and you don't mind using AI tools that are out there, then you can brainstorm with AI to help you come up with your own questions, right? So these are all sort of prompts that you might consider using that sort of leverage your interests and your background and then help you try to create questions that might be applicable to the people that you are connecting with. The great thing about AI is you can say, give me 5 questions, give me 35 questions, give me 105 questions, right? It will always help you brainstorm the types of things that might be helpful to you. And then you get to pick and choose which of those questions really does align with the questions that you have. So this is sort of an example of a broader AI prompt to help you get the types of questions that are out there, right? So just as a way to brainstorm that. Another great way of finding connections is to leverage your own connections, right? Networking is about social connections in different ways. And the more people that you know, then the greater the number of people that you can potentially know because your connections know other people, right? And they can help you connect with those other people as part of your outreach. On LinkedIn, that alumni tool on LinkedIn, one of the categories that you can filter on is your connections, your degree of connections, right? So first degree connections are people on LinkedIn that you've reached out to and you say, hey, would you like to connect? And they say yes. Or they've done the same to you. Second degree connections are people that you know that you don't yet know, but you know someone who does know that person, right? So you know someone on LinkedIn, that person knows this person, so that person that you may want to reach out to is your second degree connection. So I look for people from Penn who work at the city of Philadelphia who are my second degree connection. So I don't yet know them, but I know people who do know them, right? So you'll see the second after all their names. Cassandra here, second degree connection. LinkedIn also tells me how I know these people, right? So, or rather how I could know these people. So it tells me who I'm connected to, who knows Cassandra in this case. So some of the people I know, have been people who've worked in my office. Beth here, it was a former PhD from Penn, obviously. So I know Beth from her time at Penn, and now she's out in the world doing her own thing. Beth knows Cassandra. And so if I wanted to reach out to Cassandra, then I could leverage Beth as a potential way to do that. So here's Cassandra. I'd look at her profile. Maybe she has an answer to the question that I have about her career path, or I really want to have a conversation with her. If I click on Cassandra's contact information, because she's a secondary connection, I don't get an email. Right? LinkedIn does not give you emails for secondary connections, only first degree connections. But that means that if I click on my first degree connections contact information, so Beth is my first degree connection, I click on her contact information, it's going to show me an email. Right? So I blacked it out so that no one else can see it. So I have Beth's email because we're first degree connections. That means that Beth has Cassandra's email because they're first degree connections. So if nothing else, Beth can help me because I could ask if she could share that email with me and then I could email Cassandra directly. But there are other ways, obviously, that I could leverage Beth as a connector, right? So here are sort of 4 things that I could ask Beth to do or help me with to establish a connection with Cassandra. First of all, I could say, do you think Cassandra would be a good person to reach out to talk about this, to clarify that this would be a good use of my time to sort of reach out? I could ask for the email directly. That's all Beth has to do is share that email with me if she's willing, and then I can take it from there. I can ask Beth if I can name drop her when reaching out so that Cassandra knows that we have someone in common. And that also increases the likelihood that Cassandra will sort of return communication, because if I just reach out to someone and it's just them and me, they can ghost me sort of without any consequence. But if I reach out to someone and say, hey, Beth suggested that I reach out to you, now there's less likely, I think, that they will ghost you because potentially Beth would not see that as a positive, right? So there's this sort of subconscious fear that your social network might judge you if you don't respond, right? So you want to leverage that as much as possible in a nice way to help people respond to outreach that you're doing. I could also ask Beth directly if she could help me start a conversation. Beth could reach out to Cassandra and say, hey, Joseph would love to reach out to you. I'm connecting you on email. Take it from here, right? And so then that helps break the ice for any conversation. So 4 ways that my first degree connections can help me establish connections with my secondary connections here. Reaching out effectively, so we started bridging into this category now with that sort of approach there. Like I said, messaging people on LinkedIn isn't always the best approach to take because not everyone is as in tune with LinkedIn when they have a job as they are when they're looking for a job or exploring careers. So it might not be the best way to do that. And again, in many cases, messaging comes with a cost on LinkedIn and you definitely don't want to pay LinkedIn any money. Connecting is also not something you want to do if people don't know who you are. I get a lot of connection requests from people I've never seen, never heard of before. And the chances of me saying yes is very low. The chances of me clicking ignore is very low because that feels very bad. So they just sort of sit in this sort of purgatory out there where they don't know if I'm accepting or ignoring them. There's no reason for me to connect, and I don't understand why they want to connect with me or what value that would have. Now, you can follow people on LinkedIn. You don't need permission to do that. And that allows you to see the posts that they make in your feed without them having to connect with you. So that's the thing that you can do first. But the best time to connect with someone is after you've had some sort of significant interaction with them, maybe an email interaction, maybe a conversation, maybe you met them at an event or a conference. A way to keep the conversation going is then to connect with them on LinkedIn afterwards, because now they know who you are and what you're all about. Okay, different ways to find contact information. We talked about the fact that on first degree connections, I have an email already. We talked about the fact that my first degree connections have emails for my secondary connections, so I can ask them directly. We talked about on MyPen. We can go back to MyPen. This is Beth's profile on MyPen, and I can find that same Gmail address there as well, right? So MyPen, a really great resource if you're a Penn alum or current Penn student. CareerShift is a tool that we haven't talked about yet. CareerShift is a multifaceted platform. I use it mostly for finding contact information for people because it does a great job of finding business emails for people. I don't know where it gets the information from. I don't ask. If you say to someone that you found their email on CareerShift, they wouldn't know what you were talking about, and that's perfectly fine. But let's keep using Beth here as an example. So when I log into CareerShift, which you can do for free, I click on Find Search for Contacts. I put in Beth's first name, last name. I can put in a company name. There are 5 Beth Hallowells that I can find here. I know the top one is the right contact. Every one of these contacts that has an envelope by their name has an email address that I can then look at, right? So if I click on Beth's profile, I can find her business email address, which is oftentimes, I think, a better email to use than a personal email address, because that sort of blends the sort of what you're trying to do in terms of being a professional contact. So if you can find a business email, that's really great as well. So, always look on CareerShift for emails that you're looking for. Sometimes you won't find the actual person's email, but you'll find the system that the company uses, first.lastname@company.com, right? And then you can throw in different variations of a name into BCC in an email field until one of those is the right email address. So, sometimes it's very easy to guess what the email might be based on the formula that they use. Now, this is all great, looking for this information, spending the time. It's also worth keeping in mind that things change. And as I was making this presentation, I saw this pop up in my LinkedIn feed that Beth was leaving her position and now has another opportunity that she'll be talking about. So again, you might have done all that work to find an email, but you may not have found it. That's why a Gmail is also very helpful. And we found that in the same way because that doesn't change no matter how many times people change jobs. So reaching out effectively then is sort of, there's different ways of doing that. But if you start with the questions that you have, that's going to help you focus in on the right people who are more likely to respond because they know why you're reaching out to them. If you can make sure that your outreach and your questions seem to center their lived experience and value their lived experience, they're going to feel better about having those conversations with you. If you leverage the connections that you have in common, whether those are just physical connections or like being at Penn, or whether those are people connections, people are more likely to respond. And then, give people some slack to a certain extent. They're not always going to be in a position to respond. And it's great when they do, and you can leverage that. But there are many reasons why people are not going to respond to your outreach, right? They may be busy at work, at home. They may be worried about their job. They may have lost their job, right? They can't help you in that situation because they're not in a mental space to do that. They just may not like having conversations with strangers, right? People who reach out to me and say, hey, I'd love to take you to coffee to chat about something. Don't know that as someone with introverted tendencies, I don't want that. I'd rather have a Zoom conversation, right? So again, giving people options so that they can find the right medium in which to communicate is going to be a good thing. You may just have the wrong email, or CareerShift might have got it wrong, right? It's not perfect in terms of demonstrating which email is the right one. I think my email address on CareerShift isn't exactly accurate. A lot of people, I think, worry that they've done something wrong when they don't hear back from people, or worry that it was the wrong question, or whatever it might be, right? I think it's something that they've done. Most of the time, it's not, right? Most of the time, if you follow the approach of really being meaningful about who you're connecting with and why, there are many valid reasons why someone does not respond, and it's usually nothing that you've done wrong as part of that process. In terms of having meaningful conversations, what I'm going to point you towards most is really the informational interviewing guide that we have. So we've put together sort of best practices around this process of having informational interviews. And these are finding someone who has knowledge of a field or a role or a path, and having a conversation with them about that so that you can take what you've learned from that conversation and apply it as part of your own decision-making or apply it as part of your own application or interviewing. Information interviewing is a really good use of your time. For someone who doesn't necessarily want to have lots of conversations with strangers in a busy networking event, this is a much better approach because it's usually one-on-one, it's usually set up, there's a time and a place, there's a definitive amount of time, it can be done on the phone, on Zoom, in person, whatever makes the most sense. So really, this is oftentimes the best use of your time once you've gained enough knowledge of different career fields that are out there. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this because this guide really covers it. These types of questions, similar to the ones I shared earlier, are really great to ask people, right? They really give you insight into what's going on. You ask about what skills are valuable in their field, and then you know that you need to talk about those skills if you're going to apply for that. Or you might say, I don't have those skills yet. What can I do to build them, right? So there's a lot of actionable insights that you can gain from that process. Because we live in the world of AI, if you want to use AI, you can help, as I said earlier, use AI to give you brainstorming approaches to what questions you can ask, taking into consideration your background, the background of the person that you're engaging with, the field that you might be interested in, and whatever it is going to be meaningful to you, right? So these are just some of the questions out of the thousands that you could ask. You just have to find the ones that are meaningful to you. Don't ask questions just because you can. Ask questions that can help advance your understanding of a field and what you want to do next. Following up is critically important, right? So it's important to know that any conversation is not going to answer all your questions, or it's not going to help you be 100% certain about anything, right? It's just one data point, and the more data points you have, great. But sometimes the data points aren't going to give you a significant answer. They're just going to give you different answers, and you're going to still have to work through that and make decisions around that. Not every conversation is going to be the most engaging or enjoyable. Sometimes it takes two to tango, and you haven't found your people as part of that conversation. It may just be a good conversation, and you move on from that, and there's nothing more to it. Sometimes it's a really engaging conversation. But it won't help you build professional relationships if you don't follow up, and it won't help you sort of make actionable steps on your job search or your exploration if you don't reflect on what you've learned. So it's worth spending a little bit of time thinking about this. At the end of a conversation that you have with someone, always ask them for some next steps that are actionable. Hey, is there anyone else that you would recommend that I reach out to that you have in your network? Or was there a resource that you use that you found particularly helpful? Right? These are things that you can then directly look at after the conversation. After the conversation, within 24 hours, you can send a thank you email to that person, thanking them for their time, saying that you found that particular piece of information helpful and hoping to stay in contact. You can ask them if you can connect on LinkedIn. You don't actually need their permission to do so. It's just a good thing to throw out there. And if you don't hear back from them or whatever it is, you can go ahead and make a connection request on LinkedIn as well. That's a good way of keeping the conversation going. Beyond that, anything that you do based on the information that they've given you, you can reflect on and then thank them for. They gave you a contact. You speak with that contact. You say, hey, thank you so much for sharing that contact. It was really helpful. They send you to a resource. You look at the resource. You get back and say, hey, that resource was really helpful. I appreciate that. I did have one follow-up question on that, blah, 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 right? And so you can then try to keep the conversation going that way. If you've connected them on LinkedIn, it means that anything that you post will show up in their feed. Anything that they post will show up in your feed. So you can keep the momentum going by responding to their posts or by posting yourself so that they can stay up to date on the progress that you're making, right? So you might need to develop a LinkedIn strategy just to make sure that your connections keep you top of mind as you are going about your business. Reflecting then and evaluating on the data is the last step that we'll cover today. Really, what you're doing as part of career exploration is kind of a big career literature review, right? You're gathering a lot of information from different sources and you're condensing it down and summarizing it and then presenting it as a sort of this is what I know and this is what I'm going to do about it. So in many cases, you are going to start broad. There are lots of different fields out there that you don't know much about, and you're going to start gathering information about that and saying, I like this, I don't like this, I don't know this, I'm going to do more research into this, right? Start broad, close some doors that are not interesting to you, open a few more, and then narrow down to, let's say, 3 or 4 different career paths that you're particularly excited by, right? And looking at the paths that are available to you, looking at the connections that you have is going to help you do that. Just like with a normal literature review, if I have a PhD in animal behavior, I study chickens. If I throw the word chickens into the library database, there's 12 million results, and that's not something I necessarily want to read through. But as I become more nuanced in my understanding, I know that the species name for chickens is Gallus, and I know that I'm interested in technology and how chickens use technology. I go from 12 million to 108, of which maybe there are 30 that I'm particularly relevant, right? And that's what you're doing too. You're learning the language so that you can do more specific searching and asking more specific questions to people so you're getting the information that you're looking for. So you're going to start with a broad keyword and you're going to narrow it down in terms of your understanding of the different career paths that are out there. You're going to want to build some sort of database, a spreadsheet to keep track of all the information that you have. These are the employers that you found that people have gone on to from their career paths that they're on. These are people that you know at those employers. These are the people that you've reached out to or sent invites to or sent outreach emails to. These are the people who've got back to you. This is the information that they shared with you, right? So there's a lot of information that you can gather that gets it all out of your head and gets it down on paper, right? And it's going to make the whole process of networking much more manageable, but also show you the progress that you're making, right? Because it's going to feel somewhat overwhelming, but until you get it down and then you see the progress and the information that you're gathering and you can reflect on that, then it becomes much more actionable. In the information interviewing guide, we just have a sample spreadsheet, right? Some of the columns that you might have. Obviously, you can create your own ones. I would have different sheets for different industries that you might be interested in or different career paths, but the columns remain much the same, right? And keeping track of all those connections is really helpful. It also shows you the gaps, right? I haven't spoken to anyone at this organization. Who do I know? What might they tell me, right? So you can begin to see what your next steps might be. And that's what you're doing, right? So once you have all the information, once it's out of your head, down somewhere, you can check on your progress, but also see what the next steps are going to be